How to use a playbook? This short video describes the process of how to use an IACD playbook to build a workflow. But why do we need to build a workflow or to find the process of how to build one anyway? Because playbooks are written for humans to understand and share across organizations. The next sensible level of detail is to build a workflow for machines to understand. Whereas IACD playbooks are written at a high enough level to meet the needs of a variety of organizations across the IACD community. Workflows are the instantiations of playbooks, and orchestration services tools are responsible for coordinating and executing those workflows. Like a playbook, a workflow can be implemented in a completely manual fashion, or increasingly automated as appropriate for an organization to support organizational policies and procedures. A workflow deals with machine-to-machine interactions and sharing. Here is an example playbook on rebuilding a server. The purpose of an IACD playbook is to represent a general security process at a high enough level that contains no conditional logic. Playbooks are written for a human to understand, not a machine. From the general security process defined by a playbook, a more detailed workflow can be derived based on your organization's preferences. Workflows are written for a machine to understand so that their defined processes can be implemented by orchestration services tools. Workflows are tailored for your organization, and unlike playbooks, they do contain conditional logic. A reference workflow is the bridge between jumping from a general human understandable playbook to a tailored machine understandable workflow. A reference workflow is human readable. Here is an example reference workflow derived from the Rebuild Server playbook. Before building a workflow, a reference workflow should be created. An organization can use a reference workflow to identify gaps in capability, incompatible processes, and opportunities for automation. For example, in this Rebuild Server reference workflow, at the process step to determine associated firewall, a capability gap may be identified when the organization realizes it does not have an up-to-date list of servers with associated firewalls. Another example is at the process steps to determine compliance and update image or incompatible processes within the organization. Maybe you discovered since compliance scans are often performed by a different group than the imaging, and both groups' processes may be different than the Security Operations Center or SOC group. An example of identifying a path to automation would be if an individual submits a ticket request to the administrators to update an image and back up the update. But once the organization works out the associated process and dependencies, it decides that these steps should be automated. Now, let's step through the process steps involved in building this example reference workflow that can be applied in creating all IACD reference workflows. Step 1. Replace the initiating condition of the playbook with the trigger for the reference workflow. Ask yourself, what event in my organization would signal the start of this implementation of the playbook? In this case, the initiating condition of the playbook is that the decision has been made to rebuild the server, so you would start the workflow when an enriched ticket to rebuild the server has been submitted. Step 2. Identify which process steps and best practice options from the playbook to include in the reference workflow. Ask yourself, which best practices is my organization currently implementing? Which ones would I like to implement? This can help you make your selection from the playbook's possible best practice options. In this case, Starting from the Rebuild Server playbook, the organization does server re-imaging over the network. They do not isolate the server, but they do have to enable network connectivity to allow the re-imaging server to push the image to the server that is being rebuilt. Step 3. List local policies or process steps which you perform in your organization that are not listed in the playbook. Ask yourself, is there already a process deployed in my organization that applies to some of these steps? What specific steps do I need to take because of local policies or technologies? In this case, the organization already has a process for re-imaging over the network, and they have learned that they need to check that boot over network on restart is enabled in the imaging application. Step 4. Replace generic steps in the playbook process with the options identified in steps 2 and 3. Ask yourself, what is my local process? What steps do I take and in what order? So the start of the reference workflow looks like this. Firstly, after the triggering event of an enriched ticket to rebuild the server submitted, the operator needs to decide whether or not to rebuild the server. Assume that the operator decides yes. From the playbook best practice to re-image the server over the network, we have the more detailed reference workflow process step to verify that a boot over the network on restart is enabled on the server. Similarly, from the playbook best practice to enable network connectivity for network re-imaging, we have the more detailed reference workflow process steps to determine the associated firewall, and then to open a port for network re-imaging on the firewall, and only allow the server access if it is on the Firewall Access Control List (ACL). The playbook process step to select verification actions is removed. Also, execute mitigation actions is replaced with restart server and backup updated image. Step 5. Identify any decisions that need to be made during the process. Ask yourself, are there steps that only occur under particular conditions? In this case, the image is updated and backed up only if the image was non-compliant. Step 6. Identify the conditions that result in exiting the workflow. Ask yourself, what condition represents the end state of the playbook for my organization? What other situations or decisions would result in terminating the process? In this case, the workflow ends either if a decision is made not to rebuild the server after reviewing the ticket, or when the server is back online.